Every relationship creates a shared space, a place where identity, attachment, and individuality begin to overlap. But connection was never meant to erase who you are. In relational gravity, we explore the psychology behind closeness and how me and we can exist at the same time without either one disappearing. Relationships don't just shape what we do. They shape how we think about who we are. In the last episode, we explored relational gravity, the psychological pull that brings two identities into alignment. But alignment doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes, identity shifts happen so gradually that they feel like growth, until something inside begins to feel unfamiliar. Tonight, we explore identity drift, not as a failure of love, but as a natural psychological process that invites awareness. Identity drift rarely begins with sacrifice. It begins with cooperation. A partner suggests a new routine, and you adapt. A shared preference becomes the default, and you follow. Over time, your internal dialogue changes. You don't think, "What do I want?" You think, "What works for us?" This isn't wrong. In fact, it often reflects emotional maturity. But psychologically, every repeated adjustment teaches the brain which part of identity feel necessary and which parts feel negotiable. And negotiable identity is where drift begins. Behavioral identity drift doesn't look dramatic. It looks organized, efficient, cooperative. You begin choosing activities based on shared comfort rather than personal curiosity. You stop initiating ideas that once felt natural to you. Your environment slowly reflects the relationship more than the individual. Nothing feels forced, which is why drift often goes unnoticed. Because from the outside, everything still looks stable. Over time, thoughts begin filtering through the relationship lens. Instead of asking, "What excites me?" you ask, "What keeps things going smooth? What avoids unnecessary tension? What aligns with the rhythm we have created?" The brain prefers predictability, and predictability strengthens attachment bonds. But when predictability replaces self-reference entirely, identity begins organizing itself around harmony instead of authenticity. Not because you have lost yourself, but because your thinking has adapted to the relational system. One of the earliest emotional signals of identity drift is quiet hesitation. You consider doing something alone and immediately think about how it might affect the partnership. You pause before expressing an opinion that feels different. You soften preferences before they fully form. Sometimes independence begins to feel slightly uncomfortable. Not because your partner is controlling, but because your nervous system has learned to associate togetherness with emotional safety. And anything that moves outside of that shared rhythm can feel unfamiliar. It is important to understand identity drift is not a sign that a relationship is unhealthy. It is a sign that connection has influence. Humans are relational beings. We adapt to the emotional environments we live in. The problem isn't that identities shift. The problem begins when shifts happen without awareness. Because without awareness, adaptation can quickly become limitation, and limitation is rarely intentional. As you listen, I want you to consider: do your choices feel expansive or simply efficient? Are there parts of your personality that feel quieter than they used to? Not because they disappeared, but because they no longer feel necessary? And when you imagine making a decision independently, does it feel freeing or slightly disorienting? These questions aren't meant to create distance. They are meant to create clarity. Awareness of identity drift isn't an invitation to pull away from connection. It is an invitation to become more conscious within it. Because a strong we doesn't require a smaller me. In fact, relationships often grow stronger when individuality becomes visible again, not as opposition, but as contribution. When identity remains clear, cooperation becomes intentional rather than automatic. Two people don't need to merge completely to feel close. They need psychological space, enough room for both voices to exist without pressure to become identical. Identity drift isn't a warning that something is broken. It is a reminder that connection has weight, and that weight can be balanced. You don't have to reclaim yourself by stepping away from the relationship. You can rediscover yourself while standing inside it. Because me and we were never meant to compete. They were meant to evolve together. In the next episode, we explore the psychological loop that keeps identity drift repeating. The silent cycle of compromise that feels like harmony but slowly reshapes itself. Connection doesn't ask you to choose. It asks you to stay aware and remain present as both an individual and a partner. And the space between me and we is where awareness lives. This is relational gravity, where two identities continue moving side by side.